Yeah, every time I do this, it knocks me off, so I gotta go old school. Hey, fam, we're about to go. Thank you for tuning in. Just a little technical difficulties, and we'll figure it out as we go along.
Do I go to your IG and I'm able to share it?
Yeah, no, every time I try to click, it doesn't happen, but it's okay. I keep doing it, and hey, everybody, we're encouraging people to subscribe to my YouTube channel. So, but I can do it old school, you know. That's what we do. We'll figure it out. Okay. Here we go. All right, here we go. Here we go. Okay, perfect. Hey, peace family. I keep trying to do Instagram live and it hates on me. So then I got to go like old school, which is fine because we make everything happen, even if it's not great. So I'm so grateful for my guests, Eroc Arroyo-Montano, and we're waiting for our other guests. We have stories to tell, but what I want to tell everybody is now that we're here, I'm realizing that I have to ask for support and help. We're creating amazing content. The world is crazy. And listen, if anybody wants to volunteer, I need a newsletter. I need a producer, a social media person. Um, and I really want to keep growing the show. And I also, Eroc, I had the message you sent me because I want you to read it, right? No, because that to me is everything about the show in the best of ways, right? Okay, here's Josue. We're about to add him. Hey,
So everyone, hey everyone, thank you.
We go, girl. Hey, how are you?
Hello, peace.
Peace. Eroc, brother, nice to finally meet you. I've heard a lot about you, so
Nice
y'all haven't met yet, but you'll know each other, right? Okay, good.
Looking forward.
Yeah. So
see you over here connecting people already, Rosa. You're doing the work.
I mean, on the bridge, literally. Literally, that's my like. So many people are always them around. They're like, you should be a publicist. I'm like, that's what I do because we got to expose people, but also we got to like know the incredible work that's always happening. So before we even go into this show, I feel I have to say this thing right now. So today, the U.S. House of Representatives are pushing a bill to punish nonprofits deemed to support terrorism, right? So it's through the House, and that means it will make the Senate because the Republicans own the Senate. And obviously, like everything we know about Trump is like he's going to come after us. But I also wanted to put a historical framework on this because this is what happens, and like especially for younger people, like we don't need people to be scared, we need people to be aware, and then we're going to do the work. So I want to remind people, or maybe most people don't know, that J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, once called the Black Panther Party the greatest threat to United States security. The Black Panther Party represents the greatest threat among the Black extremist groups to the internal security of the United States. That was in 1968. And what happened in 1969 is that the FBI and with the Chicago Police Department assassinated Chairman Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, right? And then what I think always happens, particularly in the Latino communities, but as a Boricua or Dominican person, I'm always like, listen, they've been attacking us too. And succinctly, when I talk about Puerto Rico, right? So there's an article y'all can find out in the New York Times that says New Light on Old FBI Fight, Decades of Surveillance of Puerto Rican Groups. In 1965, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, wanted to tap the home telephone of a dying Pedro Albizu Campos. And there was one problem. He didn't have a phone. And what it is specifically also for Boricuas to understand, a lot of us talk about being colonized, but most people don't understand that when we try to get free, the entire government, the United States, came after us. And especially for younger people who are like, why did that just die down? I'm like, no, it's purposeful. I mean, there were a lot of technology through it, but it was also like, yeah, it's purposeful. They don't want us here. And like, also, we need to have more information in the Dominican Republic around Trujillo and the support of the United States government overthrowing and then instilling a dictator, right? So tonight, I'm so like, fam, I'm trying to get this off. And the reason I'm trying to really build this, especially after this election, is because I don't want to have any more conversations about what Trump is going to do. I want to have conversations about what we are going to do. I want to have conversations that uplift culture and politics. I don't want us to be divided in that sense. And for me, particularly watching all the media and how they kept talking about the amount of Latino men that voted for Trump, right? Like 55%. But they don't want to talk about the 53% of white women that got him back in office. And right now, we need to be aligned, not how we look, not our color, but what is our politics. So I'm super grateful to have y'all on. So first, Ernesto Eroc Arroyo-Montano, they is a proud father of 3 children, an MC, circle keeper, artist, cultural organizer, educator, and aspiring elder. A queer Boricua raised in Boston, Massachusetts, and a founding member of the radical award-winning hip-hop group Foundation Movement, with whom he has been blessed to facilitate workshops and perform around the globe. This has included Tanzania, Kenya, Cuba, with the Salvation Corps, Palestine, while they performed at refugee camps, South Africa, and Japan, where they participated in a 72-day peace walk from Hiroshima to Tokyo. All of these experiences having continued to deeply transform him. Healing justice, arts and activism, popular education remain his passion, purpose and priority in his community, liberation work, which he is able to develop, practice, and facilitate in his current role as Director of Cultural Organizing at the grassroots economic justice organization, United for a Fair Economy. Y después we got Ernesto Jose Pared, serves as the Executive Director of the Afro-Latino Forum, Director of Black Lives in Contemplation for the Community of the Incarnation, co-curator of the Afro-Latin Theology Project, co-host of the podcast, Maricet Perito, associate professor at Metro Hope Church, and executive producer of the documentary Faith in Blackness, an exploration of Afro-Latin spirituality. His perspectives on Afro-Latinidad and spirituality have been part of various publications, including the New York Times, the New Yorker. Sojourners in his writings are part of Let Spirit Speak, Cultural Journeys through the African Diaspora, and the Revista de Estudios Colombianos in Engaging Religion, among others. Okay, so as a fan of the work, thank y'all for being here today.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for having us.
No, it's all good. Like, we got to be together. Tell me.
It's a privilege to be here with you also. Thank you.
No, it's so good too, because I'm a little older than you, so I've known you and your work like for a minute. But listen, Eroc, when did your journey begin? Like, what's your journey story? Like, you're born in Boston, Mass. You have family that has been in electoral politics. And in fact, well, that's what I want to say. Eroc, can you pull up that what you sent me yesterday? No,
Yes.
I can't pull it up because then I'm going to disconnect.
No, I got it. I can pull it up. And
it's really important.
Okay. So I had been invited by you to join the show, and then I saw the promo for it, and I was just like, oh, just wanted to make sure I didn't misrepresent myself. So it just said, "Peace, Rosa." I'm realizing, based on the promo, that it's being framed as a convo with Black Latinx folks, and while I am of the diaspora and recognize Africa as my motherland, I don't identify as Black Boricua. That's not how society has experienced me, nor how I've experienced it. I stand in solidarity with my Black Latinx folks and Black Boricuas. I just wanted to give you a heads up before tomorrow. So that's what I had. And I really appreciated your response. Yeah, I really appreciated your response. I know it's all good. I know you know. It was just one of those, like, I want to make sure. I know it's all good. It's not a show where it's just Black folks. It centers the politic within the Black radical tradition. Yes, Black consciousness, Steve Biko, I'm there. Sign me up. That is my center. Also, don't just roll with folks because they say they're Black Afro. It's around politics, not necessarily the self-identity, etc. So I deeply appreciated that, and thank you for letting me get that off. And then to the question of my journey, my father and mother are independentistas from Puerto Rico. So I grew up in a decolonial home with like portraits of Ramon Emeterio Betance and Pedro Albizu Campos, and my mother a teacher, my father a teacher. Both of them came here to advance their education, and they both went to the Harvard School of Education. And this was in 1976. I was born in 81. So I was born in Boston, like Boston turmoil, Boston, like Judge Garrity, 1976 is the judge, is
busing, school busing, yeah.
Like white neighbors that threw rocks at us. Just kind of like a real I used to tell folks, like, it was very clear which side we were on if you pay attention. And on top of that, just the decolonial. I was like, when people think about like my radicalization, I grew up in a home where they were like, yo, our country is owned by this country, and we hope that it will one day be independent. And I think that just changes how you see the world, how you see American exceptionalism, etc. My father and my mother were big time leaders in Boston, and my father ended up, I was 21 years old when it happened, but he became the first elected Latino to represent the whole city of Boston. And he did that on a Black and Brown coalition. He did that with the help of some greats. Rest in peace to Mel King, Chuck Turner, just folks in community who were like, yo, we really need to get this solidarity together. We really need to come at it. Mel King, who I referenced, is the Rainbow Coalition. So even in Massachusetts, the Green Party is the Green Rainbow, because they came and they talked to Mel. And Mel was actually the person who had first invited me to vote third party. But I don't digress. That's a part of this. But in that, I think my politic was, I was a sensitive reader. I love reading. And I would read things that were like gateway. I'd be like, oh, Lincoln, okay. Oh, Frederick, oh, okay. Harriet. And I would read, and I didn't understand. At 9 or 10 years old, I could not understand the concept of people owning and selling and another people. It got me to the point of distraught, anger, tears. Like I was like a abolitionist early, and then I got mentored by dope people. Former political prisoner Kazi Torre got a hold of me when I was 16 years old.
Yeah, so for people that don't know, the United States has had political prisoners. Kazi Toure is one of the many political prisoners, and that's how I actually met you. Yep. Because I don't know, every time that I'm at the feet of political prisoners, and there's so much love, I'm like, why don't you hate anybody? And
love it so much.
It's like Kazi's like, we ain't got time for that. We gotta fight back. Yeah.
Yep. I always think about, like, because I've had good connections to all types of strategies and political ideologies on the left and radical ones, and I think of them as like just these blessings that I got in my life to be able to sit at the feet of. As much as I love to share story, I love hearing story. I love to listen to stories, so I can kick it, and I can also, and my elders appreciated that about me. And so Kazi was able to expand my understanding of abolition. And I tell folks, like, I've never met a political prisoner. I've never met one who fought for our liberation who didn't love us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that particular energy, that warriorship that they have is based on wanting us to be liberated and treated fairly. And people, I think that's what you were getting at. Like they love us. So I was politicized by that. I would organize buses to Philly to work with Pam and them, Miss Pam Africa, and I early kind of got an understanding of how the system will clap back based on who I was rolling with and how they came in. And cover of the Rupert Murdoch owned newspapers, they would put on Kazi and be like, he's on his way to New York, and I would be with him. So I would be like in the car, like, yo, this is wild. Why are they like, and these were the freedom fighters that's why I got blessed when I was in Cuba. I got to meet Assata. And I think actually, as I'll
got to meet Assata Shakur, because I think.
Sorry, thank you for that.
No, it's not. Look,
Shakur.
No, it's not us. Yeah. It's more like at this moment, there's so much information that's accessible, but younger generations are only fed through an algorithm. Yep. So that's why I said, what's your origin story, right? Like, I'm going to be like, I know you. I know Josue, my people. But the story is, I think, what's missing.
So it's like
particularly my generation, the hip hop generation is
there we go. So
making people feel bad that they don't know. And I'm like, well, how are they gonna know if they don't know? Like, you can't just assume that young people or any generation knows the information that has been kept from us.
Yes, Assata Shakur currently has political asylum in Cuba. Freedom fighter, Black Liberation Army. She people like Nahanda Abiodun, rest in peace, organized to break her out of prison, and she went to Cuba where she got a political asylum. And just meeting her was just a wonderful point in my life. One of the things I was grieving, Assata is still with us, but we did lose in Boston, Mel King, and we lost Chuck Turner. These were like radical leaders that I loved in elected politics that I loved. And one of the things that I was grieving when they had passed on was missing the internationalists, missing the global anti-Blackness, the fight against global anti-Blackness, the fight against imperialism, the fight, and that something happened in the 2010s that started to shift. Like, because we always said, think global, act local, but there was this thing that started to just kind of like, I don't know, I think isolate. And some of that I think really broke through when people got to witness the first ever, social media genocide. But I also think I'll stop there. But for me, there was a sense of like the books, the music. I was schooled by the music. I was schooled by the cats. I got to tour with Dead Prez. I love those cats. I got to kick back with people and create music and open for Rakim and just like be able to be in positions with my people to have these conversations and visit people in prison and write folks in prison and get letters back and really, I think, stay politicized and radicalized of like understanding that that this is that we are in the belly of the beast and being very clear about it.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that, because I think it's so important that we know our journey. And like, I saw you always as a cultural warrior, and those times with Dead Prez and kind of all those times, I think is what's maybe missing in the younger generations. That's super disposable, like 10 minutes and then I'm done. Mm-hmm. But to bring Josue into the conversation, Josue, what is your origin story?
Yeah, thank y'all so much. It was just wonderful to hear that, Eroc, because as I've heard of your name, and so meeting you is just so dope for me, and an honor for me as well. Yeah, I was literally right before this call. I was right before this event. I was at a call where I was talking about my origin story. I think so. I was born in Colombia. I was born in Bogota, Colombia. My father was a Black lawyer in Colombia who was offered to pastor a South American congregation in Brooklyn, and that's what brought us here. And I had always had this, my main mentors, Rosa is Miriam Jimenez Roman, and Miriam Jimenez Roman, Black feminist, Puerto Rican. She always said that I had this burgeoning understanding of my Blackness. Obviously, knowing because my lived experience is Black. Actually, I appreciate your statement, Eroc, about like, hey, that's not my lived experience. That's not how I'm experiencing the world. And because I literally just said to someone like, yep, the lived experience actually changes the way that we experience and understand our blackness. And I understand that there's, hereditary blackness, and then there's phenotypical and lived experience blackness. But then I also said the same thing that you just said, Rosa, that doesn't necessarily mean political alignment. And so just because, all skin folk ain't kinfolk, right? So,
Exactly.
So I think for me, I remember very early on just, starting to notice like, oh, I'm black in this country. Like I knew that I was black in Colombia, right? We moved to Colombia. We moved from Colombia when I was around 10 years old. And then I remember being here and being reminded like, oh, I'm black in this country. And the difference of that, and then just wanting to learn more about what that looked like and politically what that meant for me, right? Especially so, I had a lot of like competing priorities, right? So I was growing up in a very Pentecostal Christian household. That's how my parents were. My father was a minister, but he was a very black minister who never allowed anyone to lower him or denounce him because of his blackness. Like he was always very proud and was told us, you need to be proud of your blackness. And he was very informed of what his politics were. I would say that it wasn't my father was not a black liberation person. That was not his thing. But that was then what I learned through my own readings and like hearing hip hop. I was just mentioning that one of my first, there was like hip hop was outlawed in my house. I was just reading something that said hip hop is not always political, but it can be political when you notice what is allowed and not allowed in your house.
Right.
And remember
your family was like, absolutely not. No.
Right. And so I remember that it wasn't allowed. And so I snuck, some like DMX. I remember specifically the first DMX.
Wrestling,
but I also remember at the same time, right, DMX. But I remember at the same time, Midnight Marauders is what I snuck in. And Midnight Marauders, as you remember, Tribe was so Afrocentric that I remember was like, I want to be like them. Like, I don't know what they're doing, but I want to, right, just so proud of the blackness and of all aspects. They were from Queens, it was right here. And then, listening to poets like Dead Prez and a bunch of other people early on that I was just like getting put on at that time, right? Like, oh, shoot, there's this whole thing. And meeting 5%ers, right? I remember like my first book. The first book that I randomly got at a book fair was Blacks in Science by Ivan van Sertima. Now, if you know who Ivan van Sertima is, you know that Ivan van Sertima is like one of the tenet teachings of Afrocentrism, and like you have to read Blacks Before Columbus, or They Came Before Columbus, and Blacks in Science. And I don't know why I was the kid in a book fair. Everyone's getting Where's Waldo. I'm getting Blacks in Science. Like that's what I was getting. And I remember that then all of that led to me starting to learn more and wanting to learn more about Black Colombian history, obviously seeing my experience with my father, asking him questions, and then learning with Miriam. Like then once I met Miriam a little bit later, learning more about overall blackness and just kind of having an understanding like, it's this and we're over here and there's this connection that we all have. And I remember very young, I was challenging people when they would question, like, are you really black? Why, you kind of speak Spanish, and I would like push back against that. And then like what I think that led me to is to really start to read like Black liberation texts, like Asada's text, right? Like I would say that it starts with Malcolm X's autobiography and other things that come from that lineage, and then reading some Angela Davis stuff, reading some Audre Lorde stuff. I mean, now I read a lot of Audre Lorde, but like starting to read certain people at that time were really starting to orient me to like what we need to do as people is fight for Black liberation. And then I started to understand what Black liberation meant overall, right? Like Amilcar Cabral's fight was a very unique fight that Amilcar Cabral was doing. But when he talks about Black liberation, and when different people talk about Black liberation, it talks about it as a root of what's going to make all of us free, right? And I always remember the first time that I heard Bell Hooks. I remember hearing her first, and she said that the same kind of idea that comes from the Combahee River Collective statement, that like we believe that if all Black women are free, then everyone would be free because it would mean to undo all systems of oppression. And she said something like that, and I remember thinking like that feels right to me, just because of what I was seeing, just even as a young person, like the way that Black femininity was lowered and the way that other things were lowered, and it's like that made sense to me. Where then my continuation has been to center Black liberation in everything that I do. Like I was just telling a few friends, like whatever we do it, whether we do it in a spiritual sense, as you read, some of my things are within a certain sense of spirituality, whatever we're doing in a spiritual sense, in a musical sense, in whatever sense, if we're not doing it for Black liberation as a purpose within it, then I'm like, we're just wasting time, because they'll always let us do something for whatever entertainment. But if we try to bring our people and free our people, that's a whole different situation there. And so like now that's just become like very clear to me. Like when I do some things, I do something called Black Lives in Contemplation, which is a way that we're doing contemplative practice and meditative practice with folks. And even that, I'm like, yo, if that's not being done for Black liberation, I'm not just doing it just to have some sort of ethereal experience or whatever. I want to free us here so that we can be free wherever else, and learning from that. And so I think for me, that has become so important in my life. So I think that, my understanding of Colombians and Colombian Blackness was really important. But then really New York City introduced me to the diaspora. I remember meeting kids from Cuba, Haiti, Dominican Republic, Panama, like all these Black kids in Jamaica and Trinidad, and seeing kids in Barbados and being like, yo, what's all this? And obviously African-American kids. And then just having this, like, I remember very young, like putting my skin on to someone when they were like, you're not Black. I'm like, we're the same color. Like, look, and like putting my skin and doing that. And that's how we would debunk that stuff. And so I learned that from Brooklyn. That's why, like, for me, Brooklyn, which is originally Canarsie, Muncie, Lenape land, Brooklyn has become a really important, salient part of my identity, because it is where I learned this diasporas. Brooklyn was, a cuna, as we say in Spanish, of hip hop, right? Like, and I was very hip hop. I'm from the next generation from y'all, but for me, hip hop informed a lot of my understanding. And 5%er theology and ideology was so embedded into all of hip hop. Specifically, I would say Brooklyn and Queens hip hop specifically.
Yeah, and Harlem. And I'm glad you bring that up, because so first, when Josue is talking about the 5%ers, the 5%ers is kind of an offshoot of the Nation of Islam, right? So in the early 90s and probably till the 2010s, if you went to Harlem, not only could you go to their office, at the same time, when you came off the subway, you would be confronted with the Hebrew Israelites, right? So me, as a college student, I'm like, hey. And then the Hebrew Israelites were like, sis, you're not from Spain. You're Black. And I'm like, no, I do know that. And they would be like, what? Because the Hebrew Israelites are very infamous for basically like, everybody is trash except us kind of thing. But it's interesting because my journey to my husband, who's Justice, he was part of the Nation of Gods and Earths. But when I was in high school, my boyfriend was also part of the Nation of Gods and Earth. And the first thing he ever took me to was when Nelson Mandela came to Harlem, right? And like he was like, yo, skip school. And I was like, all right, whatever. You're my boyfriend. I'm a senior. I already got into college. My parents already like leave.
This is 1992, I believe.
Yeah, and no. It was no. Okay,
later?
No, you're right. 1992, and I was like, what the F? Because I had grown up in the Bronx and then Westchester, respectfully, but it wasn't until I went to college that I even knew I was like a citizen, like. And I'd be like, Mom, Dad, and they're like, we thought you knew that. And I'm like, no, I didn't know that. So my experience in college was, like I would say, SUNY Albany. I live in Albany, New York now. I would not be this Rosa. But I do remember coming home and like talking to my father and my mom and then my brother and my sister. And then my mom's like, what, you're Black now? And I was like, yeah, I guess, I don't know. I mean, my dad is Black. You went light. Like, why didn't I know this kind of stuff? But it wasn't that they were trying to keep it from us. It was more like anybody who's an immigrant or a migrant, their experience is more like, let's just fit in. Wherever we are, let's just fit in. Don't be like drawing attention to yourself. Either way, Josue, you also coming from a spirituality, and religious thing. And a lot of what, particularly for me, the Catholic Church did was not good. so then on top of it, I'm challenging my parents on religion. And I'm like, I don't want to be around. Like my sister and brother, they'll get it. But both of you are both speaking to this Black radical tradition, but the hip hop and how incredibly important hip hop is. And I think one of the biggest mistakes this 50-year celebration of hip hop has done was to erase particularly Boricuas and Puerto Ricanos, right? Like, I read a lot and we're barely mentioned. With that said, it doesn't mean that we weren't all privy to that culture. That's sort of like, yeah, with Tribe Called Quest, or Zoo Nation, and there's a lot in there. But Josue, what was your when did you know, or what was your journey, particularly to your religion and your spirituality?
Well, I mean, as I understand it now, I think took a long time. I think that, I grew up in a household that was Pentecostal and that was Christian, under a specific tradition. But I, very young, wanted to learn more about that because I felt like the story was incomplete, right? Like, you get taught certain things. And then I went and studied theology, and then I learned a little bit more about it. And I would say that, that's how I came up, and that's how I understood. I mean, I was a minister at 16 years old. I was really young.
You're like an R. Sharpton minister?
Yeah. Oh, well, not
I
mean,
his, but Al Sharpton, 16 years old, but yes.
Well, I always say I'm more identified with Baldwin. He was a minister very young too. And Baldwin then understood why the church was hypocritical and was like, and then I literally, the first time I read that, I was like, oh, I know his experience really well because I was a young preacher, a young minister really early. And then what I think has done is then I understood, I got to study more later and understand. And so I embrace a much more expansive definition of spirituality and Christianity now, because I'm not here to defend Christianity. Christianity is a very problematic thing, but Christianity was also colonized itself. That the original religion of Christianity was then colonized by the Roman Empire. Like it wasn't originally that. And actually most folks of color dipped the moment that happened. Like they were like, oh, that's what y'all doing? We out. And we're going to the desert and we're not going to be here because what the empire is doing is something different than what we were signing up for. So I think that once I started to understand it, then that allowed me to actually feel more comfortable with like what I grew up in. Because there were times when I was like, yo, I can't support this that literally enslaved people. But then I started to understand, wait, okay, it was also colonized itself. And people of color left because they were like, I see what y'all are doing. What we would call people of color now, right? Because they're diverse people. I see what y'all are doing. We're gonna go. And most of them went to the desert, created other things, branched out, and then that helped me embrace a much more expansive view of spirituality.
So Eroc, so you're growing up in Boston, which is always like interesting because it's Boston.
Yep.
But like your high school experience, but your journey as an organizer. I obviously we have met, but like really it was a specific time we were in Detroit, Michigan, and it was maybe a year after Hurricane Maria, so there was the Allied Media Press thing, and I think that's the first time we really got to build. But were you already like active in organizing or privy to information in high school, because also your family is also electropolitically aligned?
Yes. I think also I did grow up in the church as well, Christian adjacent. I like to say I learned a lot of really beautiful things in church. Like I learned how to get them hugs in with the elders. So we did not have a very affectionate home. Bless my parents. They weren't affectionate, but ain't nothing like hugging like a little overweight elder, just hugging you and being like, Papito, que Dios te cuide, like da 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 da. And singing with people and collecting the plate for a family whose husband was deported, and the plate go around and the money go right to her. A small church in Boston. So my parents had me thinking already different just by nature of being decolonial. I was in a high school called Westy in Boston Public Schools. My a short story, my sophomore year, and I would get in trouble a good amount. And the vice principal was mad cool. I liked him a lot. His name was Mr. Miller, black dude. Was a teacher for a long time. His brother was the editor of the black newspaper in Boston called the Bay State Banner. His son, and so he was just somebody that was like, hey man, come over here. Like, he knew my father, and he'd be like, what are you doing? You smarter than this, that kind of vibe. And so he was like, next time they send you to the office, don't go to the principal's office, go into my office. This is the vice principal's office. If I'm not there, just have a seat and wait for me. So they used to send us just for being late. Real talk. I was not really a trouble. I didn't really talk a lot, but I was respectful. My mother was a teacher, but you'd be 15 minutes late, 10 minutes late. They'd be like, to the office. And so I'm going to the office, and I remembered this offer, and I went into his office. He wasn't there, but it was a big office with a desk and then like a little table, one of those like tables where they have magazines and stuff. And there was a newspaper there called Rising Times. And it was the Rising Times was a youth newspaper. I just snatched it. I grabbed it up. I love to read. Like, I was definitely a nerd when it came to reading. I loved reading. I had my source magazine. I had everything. I was reading, and I loved Baldwin, etc. And I grabbed this thing, and they're like reviewing hip hop albums, and they're talking about this trip down south, and they're talking about apartheid in South Africa. There's these different articles from teenagers, and then I realized it's in Boston, and when you get to the back of the little newspaper, it talked about this trip. It was called Project Hip Hop, history into the past, highways into the past, history, organizing power. And it was Project Hip Hop. And you have to apply, and then you get this 16-state civil rights trip with some of your peers, etc. Interview, blah, blah, blah. It was the first time I ever did anything for myself. I snatched it. I was like, I'm being called to this thing. I was so hype. I applied. I went to the interview prepared. Like, they were not ready for me. I was like super ready for this thing. And they can feel my passion. It was palpable. And they'd ask questions that I was like, oh, people my age are having these conversations. This is amazing. And I would get entangled and enthralled in the conversations. And then they brought me on. And when they bring you on at that time, Project Hip Hop, you had to commit to a series of trainings. Family included how I met Kazi. This is how I met Kathy Hoffman of the Cambridge Peace Commission. This is how I met Kazi, who taught me about abolition for the first time in my life for the prison framework, abolition framework. And we would talk to people. And then this trip, Kazi was one of the mentors on the trip. And I was like, I'd ask him questions like, yo, but really, we can't beat them with guns, fam. Like, and he would talk and da-da-da. And I'm like, yo, but because I've come to, at 43 years old, I don't believe we can out diabolical.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
We can't. But shout out to the resistance fighters and the warriors who fight to the very bitter end. Bless them. I believe there are martyrs and resistant fighters, and we must honor them and protect them and recognize why they exist and why they are on the planet. And why they even exist, and give them their props and not act like we better than them because we can't do what they do, or maybe don't have the same courage, or maybe not the same political strategy. So I moved to the side. This was the thing. I did this thing, and I went on this trip, and it was a bunch of cats who were like me, trying to have these conversations. We'll be freestyling in the van. We will go to different places on this trip. We got to meet Reverend Harold Middlebrook, who was one of the reverends who was with Martin when he was assassinated. We got to meet with Dr. Cleveland Sellers, who would tell us about the meetings with Kwame Ture and I'm a teenager, but I'm super curious, and they're listening to us. They're treating us. They're doing this crazy thing where they're treating teenagers like we're people. And so as a longtime youth worker, I would always tell people, like, I do this wild thing where I treat them like they're members of my community. And so they were doing that. They were allowing us to be in conversation with them, to think out loud and say stuff that maybe didn't make sense, but they got an idea of who we were, and we got to ask questions. And that really politicized me further. And so now I had my parents who had given me this decolonial Black and brown solidarity framework. And then I had now my peers who were also like, yo, like, and as I get older, realizing that I was born on April 4th in 1981, which was just 13 years to the day of the assassination of Martin. And they make it seem like black and white pictures, like it was just like they make it seem so long ago. But just 13 years, people were still healing, still trying to figure out, man, they got Malcolm, they got Martin, they got all of that kind of stuff, the riots, the Reagans, the etc. So thinking about what we came up in, and then the fight against those people, and then being able to just be in a van with Kazi Torre for hours, and Nancy Murray of the ACLU, and I met a really cool white lady. You feel me? I needed that.
Yeah.
I needed to meet, because I had so much critique for them, and I still do. But it was so dope to meet one. I was like, oh my God, I needed to meet you. Like, because you exist, I believe in this multiracial resistance even more. Because
and you saying that, I'm as a trained historian, anytime I talk, I'm like, listen, this is not a nation that has been built for centuries. It's not decades, right? Like if we look at the actual finding of America and the United States of America, you're talking about 200 years in the world times, right? And when I'm talking particularly to young people, I'm always like, listen, I did not grow up in a movement household. I definitely grew up being proud to be Boricua. I definitely grew up seeing my dad to this day have his own business, that my mom was able to stay with us, that the movement of living in the South Bronx and then going 21 miles difference to Westchester County, the second richest county in the country, that my mom made. I think my mom began to see particularly what was happening to a lot of my fam in the Bronx, because my mom would always, every weekend, we were with the family in the Bronx, and they were seeing some of my cousins dying from heroin, from crack, alcoholism, right, kind of thing. And I know that when I began college, I just didn't even have knowledge myself as a Puerto Rican. And then I begin to get information. I get really angry at my mom and my dad. Like, how could you not tell me this? Like, how didn't I know this? Like, every year we're going to Puerto Rico twice a year, which in itself is a privilege. So for folks that are listening, I always tell people, like, don't worry about what you don't know, but now that you know, do better. And my doing better is I wasn't raised in a movement household, but my daughter has been raised in a movement household. So, because again, all this information, I think it's hard to sit with things when you're a child, and then you're thinking about when you're in your 20s or 30s, and you're like, yo, what did my mom and dad do? What didn't they do? And you have a family, in Boston that is like generations deep, kind of thing. And I'm wondering, like, when both of you went to college, did that shift, or was more like, okay, I found my people? Josue, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to add something before. That's a good question. I want to add something. I also think that sometimes we have to. I learned this from let's call it movement folk, right? Like that. We're saying different parts, that progress isn't linear. I think that we have this idea that like progress is always linear. Like you go here, you're gonna go here, you're just gonna keep going up. And what I learned from different people that I remember, like when I was meeting the people who were, in the mid to late 90s, because that's when I became to cultural awareness in the US. Like, when you migrate here, you kind of, the first few years, you don't know where you're at, what you're doing, you kind of know a little bit. And then 96, I came in like mid 93 to 94. 96 was when I was like, oh, I know where I'm at. All right, I got it. And I remember like going to some free Mumia things. And I remember talking to those people, and they would say like, they would say the idea of like progress isn't linear. Like there's always this idea like you're moving, and then you're going to go back, and then we're going to keep fighting, and then we still have to keep fighting for the cause. And I think that's the thing. And I think I learned that also. Like I think college, like I told you, I think since 12, whenever I bought that Ivan Van Sertima Blacks in Science book, I had this idea. But I remember college when I majored in history too, Rosa. So I'm a history major, and a Latin American history major. And I remember that understanding just the diverse history of Black folk. And one of my professors was really important for that. Like, 'cause he was a Black professor, he would teach us that. I went to the City College in New York, which is where Dr. Leonard Jeffries taught, and I remember taking his Black Studies class. And
wait, and hold up real quick.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
If you don't know who Dr. Leonard Jeffries is, you need to know. So the CUNY system is the City University of New York, and then the SUNY system is the State University of New York. But particularly at Hunter, it was oh God, our elder
Juan was there.
No. John Henry Clark.
Oh, okay, yeah,
Professor John Henry Clark, who was mentored by Arturo Schomburg, created the first Black and Puerto Rican Studies Department at Hunter, right, and in the country. But now it's one of the few Black and Puerto Rican Studies departments, right? And it's interesting too that like the chair of that is Anthony Brown, who was taught by Dr. Turner, who encouraged me to go to Cornell for my master's to be with Dr. Turner. So like that, we're talking about decades, of community building, but for some reason, there's still like a gap where younger people don't know what's going on. But when you look at CUNY in a system and what it has brought us as scholars, it's pretty incredible in itself. And that hopefully no one went into debt in CUNY, because at that time we could legit afford not to go into debt.
I mean, Bell Hooks taught at City College.
Yeah.
And Lord always said she loved to go to Medgar Evers. She always felt like she loved going to Medgar Evers, which is here in Brooklyn. Yeah. And like I do think people don't know that.
What's funny is my first speaking gig was at City College with Maita Moreno Vega. So there's a whole story to it, but let me just say this. I got to meet Dr. Maita Moreno Vega and my comrade Lumumba Akinwole of relationship, and she asked me to be on a panel in 1995. And I was like, I don't know. Like, I can speak publicly. I've done it. And she's like, no, but we'll pay you. And I'm like, oh, you're going to pay me to talk? So my mom comes with me. And at the end of the event, I have a check. I'm an archivist. I save everything. And I have a $200 check. And my mom goes, why would anybody want to pay you to talk? But she said it very lovingly, like, oh, to the same, my dad's like, why do people pay you to talk? I'm like, because I'm dope. But that's how intricate the relationships are. Until you start to meet people you don't know. And then you're like, oh, wait, you did this work. Oh, my God, you did this. Oh, thank you for bigging me up, but I'm bigging you up. Mm-hmm. And that moment for some of us, not all of us, where we're in higher ed and something clicks. Mm-hmm. And we're like, yeah. Josue, finish your point.
No, just go ahead, Eroc. Go ahead.
Yeah.
No. I'm with you.
I was just gonna say, yeah. So I was gonna say that it was college. I remember taking the class with Dr. Len Jeffries, learning some history and starting to understand that. Then I did say, like, that phrase that you said before, you said a little bit ago when you asked the question, like, that's where I found my people. And I remember that I was like, okay, because I remember like my understanding. I remember that I dated this girl at City College who was like, oh, you're the first non-Black person I'm dating. And I was like, who says that I'm not Black? Who's told you this? Like, and I remember saying that, and I remember challenging her and pushing her to understand about who we are as people, right? Like, not to have a reductive understanding of Blackness, but a more expansive understanding of what Blackness looks like. And it was there that happened. So that's the only thing I was going to say, because Dr. Len Jeffries' class was really instrumental to that. Yeah. And my professor, his name was Professor Lewis, was also really instrumental to that. So.
And Dr. Jeffries is still alive. In fact, one of my experiences, I'm being the president of Black Student ASUBA, Black Student Union in Albany, is when we brought him to speak. We were dealing with Zionist protesters, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, my experience at SUNY Albany was always a challenge from Zionists on our campus, right? And it's to this day where I'm like, I'm not scared to speak out. I just know, like, here I am at a state university in New York, Albany. I'm the president of the Black Student Union, and then I'm being attacked by Zionists because of who were coming to speak. And when I mean attack, like they broke into my house. I was luckily on the street when apparently they tried to like hit me with a car. And one of the brothers was always taking me home because of the kind of death threats I was getting. And mind you, folks, this is in the 90s. We had no social media. We maybe had a fax machine. If you were living on campus, you didn't have a phone. There was no, but the attack against me for bringing Kwame Ture and Dr. Jeffries. And I remember at the end of the night, Dr. Jeffries pulled me aside and was like, "You're very brave." And I'm like, "No, that's the whole team." And he's like, "Yeah, the whole team, but everyone's going to remember your name." And he's still alive. And I really would encourage people to really look at the beginning of the Afrocentric movement and how, especially in higher ed, it took hold where we as Black, Latinos, Hispanic, whatever, those were like, wait a minute, like we deserve equity and we should be wanting to see our elders. And I think in a weird way, that's where we are now, where people are scared to talk. A lot of our people are scared to talk about the genocide in Palestine.
Yeah.
And I talk to younger people and they're a little bit judgmental. And I said, yo, you don't understand. This is not just a one-off. It's an entire movement to discredit us as, quote, Black Latino folks. So whether you identify as Afro-Black or whether you identify as not Afro-Black, our politics is what's making people come to us.
Okay.
And I'm wondering what both of you think right now around the attacks, also knowing that eventually, and even at this moment, they are going to try to probably shut down Black studies, Puerto Rican studies, ethnic studies, women, because that's where they're going. In fact, today I was reading an article where they said the Trump administration doesn't want to talk about it, but they're coming after all ethnic studies in the country. And I'm wondering from both of you, either one, how do we help particularly young people in college who should be taking these classes, or what should we be doing as people coming from those kind of academic backgrounds?
So I want to clarify first that I have no degrees. It is what it is. I actually was one of those people who would quote
intellectual.
I will, yeah, organic intellectual. You were one of the first people to give me that, to hold that. I quote very rarely Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens, but he said, never let school get in the way of your education. And so I read The Long Walk to Freedom, which was like this 900-page book from Nelson Mandela when I was 19. And then when I was 21, I spent 2 months in South Africa and got to go to Robben Island and got to meet Desmond Tutu and got to go to Soweto and Cape Town and got to meet with activists and ask them about the ANC and then ask them which ways they were thinking about, like what didn't work, what worked. Got to spend time in Zimbabwe with college students who had been kicked out of college for fighting against, at that time, who was at once a freedom fighter, but was now a dictator in Mugabe. You know, if he had stepped down in 84, he would have just been remembered as a freedom fighter who fought and beat England. But at this point, he was really repressive. I got to go to Palestine and perform when I was 23. I met Asada and Nahanda Abiodun when I was 20, and I would come back and my friends would be in university and they'd be like, "Fam, we reading about that." and they would ask me, like, "Fam, what?" And then I would, and so there was a mutual respect. I have a super respect. I'm not one of those people who's like, "Oh, you see these ivory tower, blah, blah, blah." Nah, I have people I love who have put in the scholarship and the work to get their masters, to get their PhDs, to do the study and the scholarship. Watch who they study under and watch what they're putting out. I think that we need to be very careful when we make that distinction between us. But I was definitely one of those folks who was loved learning but didn't like the system of learning, and I was encouraged by some folks to stay out of it, and I appreciated that encouragement. And then when I was 29 years old, I'm 43 now, I went back and got an art degree because I fancy myself an artist and I wanted to learn more about screen printing and ceramics. And I went in there fully formed, like I was working full time. I already had a baby. So I didn't have the same experience others had. And sometimes I miss that. Sometimes I do miss that. But I think there's, you know, we come in different ways. And also when we talk about Trump coming for these folks, let's be clear that that you know, Biden has been coming for these folks, and that Trump will continue, because what they love to do, what the neoliberals love to do now, neocon, neoliberal, whatever mesh loves to do, is open the door for the potential for it to be abused even more. They love that. How can we set the precedent for your future attack? And so I think I'm seeing here in Massachusetts, universities that are shutting down Students for Palestine, universities that have changed their charters of what they consider discrimination. So if you say that you don't believe in Zionism, making that something that means you're anti-Semitic, and making that claim against their very own Jewish people who are anti-Zionists, like self-hate, et cetera, et cetera. And then anybody who questions, you know, at this point, hey, we don't think that you should be killing people, like a moral argument, and somehow that makes you the persona non grata, the anti. So, you know, I've gotten my fair share of it. I saw it early in the game when me and Optimus were performing rhymes. I didn't know until we got back from Palestine just how strong these folks would be. We had Homeland Security calling before some of our shows to get us canceled on shows. We had, so it was, and this is like 21, 22. All we did was go to Palestine. We performed a refugee camp. We came back and we did the crazy revolutionary act of just saying what we saw. Simply just saying what we saw and what we experienced meant that somehow we were no, we are pro-liberation, and I draw the line at human rights. I draw the line at human rights. The line is at human rights for everyone. And so, yeah, we saw that. We performed. We got to perform in open for Mary Baraka. And when he came to town, he was being protested.
Yeah, always.
Yeah. And so it was just like, wait, why are they protesting this Titan, this incredible human? And then you start to realize, like, you know, make the connections and understand, like, the colonial powers, et cetera. And it is, you know, I don't know.
You know what I'm thinking right now is this, like, you know, obviously the Democrats and whatever. I'm right now. I am truly concerned about the fact that this law has passed the House and it's going to pass by the Senate. And I think anybody that's been an organizer for a while, we know the stories of how they have come after our people. But particularly, this is a law around, quote, anti-terrorist.
Yes.
So what happened to our people in the late 60s to the mid 70s, post-civil rights, 68 to about 75, is when we see the attack on all those elders. Even either you're dead, you're in prison, or you're in exile. And I think right now what's happening is with so much information and so many places to get it, people become complacent and they're like, that could never happen here. And I'm at this time, I'm like, well, it has happened before. And maybe you don't want to talk about how you're going to shut it down on the cell phone, because then the FBI is going to be waiting for that. I think there's a big gap between, like, they've done this, but now they have more to do it. It's not going to take a year of investigation. It takes a day, and you're like, you're on some kind of list.
And who's behind that? But that was endorsed, by the way, by the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, who, even though it's not factual, I love calling them the nonprofit wing of AIPAC. And they do come for folks, and they are for real. And they also come to our communities and pay our leaders trips to Israel. Some people I love. Some people I love that I've seen.
They always target now HBCUs. So they could have a clear distinction of, like, well, these African-American students love Israel. And you're like, yeah, because he promised a trip for free. and it's like, who wouldn't, as a student, be like, well, let me go. Pero Josue, you bring from Colombia, and particularly in the late 80s and the Constitution recognizing Afro-Colombians. What has been your experience? Have you been back to Colombia? And what is your experience with? Because I consider Colombia probably the number one around, like, we're going to put this in the Constitution. We need to right the wrongs of indigenous, but also Afro-Colombians. And for me, when I got into this work, it was definitely Colombia, which was like my Northern Star. I was like, oh my God, like, it's not just a movement, it's also changing the actual constitution of a country.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, you're talking about the Law 70 of 1993, which was what in Colombia, that was the big law that like recognized Black communities and recognized Black lands, like lands that were lived on by Black people, right? Because the Colombian government for a time had given ley lands. Before I say that, I do want to add that the reason Eroc and Rosa, with what you're saying, is actually a reason I've been listening to some folks who have been saying we need to get back to the idea of public education the way that we used to have it. There has been a little bit of a disconnect that we've made some things like we need to keep it within an institution. But one of the strengths about doing public education in this way is that it diversifies knowledge, right? And not only that diversifies knowledge, it democratizes who's teaching the knowledge. Right. Mm-hmm. So like that's one of the main benefits, right? Like because Eroc, like your learning sounds like it was very ancestral and like I'm learning from elders and this is how that's how I'm getting my knowledge. And that's really important. Where in Western societies, usually an institution is your elder, not an elder is your elder. So just wanted to add that real quick because I did think like, and this is a quick segue and then I'm gonna go back, but like, you know, the song of this summer has been Not Like Us, right? And Not Like Us is whatever. But you know what? It does include a third verse that's like, yo, let me tell you about the way that slavery looked like in Atlanta.
Right, in Atlanta.
And I tell people, I'm like, that was really actually good to include that because that song is played everywhere. And that third verse, whether, yes, is it the most, like there are better people we know that wrote better stuff. But that third verse at least schools to some people to something they didn't know. Like they didn't know the history of colonialism and settlement for Black folk in Atlanta. And maybe they know a little bit. Maybe that might spark someone to be like, let me go read more about that because that's how kind of that works. Yeah, so, you know, I go to Colombia all the time. I go to Colombia. I try to go every 2 to 3 years. I'm still very in touch with that. I always say that, you know, my experience, though, is mostly as a Black Colombian in Brooklyn. Like that is my experience. Like, so I mean, here in Brooklyn, like I'm connected with some Colombian folk here in New York, in the U.S. Washington, D.C. has a huge, strong Black Colombian presence that they're trying to continue the, Black Colombian representation. Colombia, though, has passed some progressive laws and has done some things. It is still a very racist country, though. Like we have our first in Colombia, the first Black vice president, or really.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to speak to that. Yeah.
And Francia is dope, and Francia has worked with the community, and it comes from community movements and all that, and that's been wonderful. Like it has actually been really great, but it revealed this dark, ugly side of Colombia. Because you know what? I remember that movie. I forget the movie now, but with the guy Kaiser's also Usual Suspects, and when the guy at the end says the biggest trick devil ever played is that he doesn't exist, and I think that works here in the U.S. with some of this neoliberal idea, neocon ideas, and in Colombia, like the biggest trick is to everyone's like that can't happen here. We good here. That's not going to happen, but we know that could happen almost anywhere. Like the U.S. had a lot of pro-Nazi rallies during World War II. Like if people just study, I worked in a school in the Bronx. I'm gonna tell you this quick story. I worked in a school in the Bronx, and the school in the Bronx had bought like a former synagogue, and they just were rebuilding. And it was the church, a Pentecostal church, and the school was rebuilt. The church was rebuilding, and they broke the walls, and there was like money lining the walls. And then they went and called the people they bought the thing from, like, yo, we found like $400,000 here. What is this money for? They were like, oh, we were afraid that they were going to come for us, so we hid the money in the walls because the U.S. was so had a lot of pro-Nazi sentiment.
Yeah,
actually, like people, they were like, and so they were like, you could keep the money. Thank you for being honest. Y'all could keep the money. So there's like Black Puerto Rican church kept $400,000 they found lining the walls. So I always say that because I'm like, yo, y'all thought like that wasn't here, but that thing was here all the time. And I think that's what we've seen in Colombia. Like there were many people who were like, oh, Colombia passed law 70 and they're great and they have this inclusion. But Colombia literally has 1 day of official recognition of African descent and of indigenous people, just 1 day. And then outside of whenever a black soccer player misses a goal, they're reminded of how bad the blackness is, right? And so like there's this racism embedded within Colombian culture that is something that we're trying to fight against. And so we did that for a while. Me and some friends created a group that we were talking about Black Colombian presence and Black Colombian influence. And we get interviewed and the white Colombians will say some racist shit like, oh, don't talk about racism. Y'all separate yourselves. And I'm like, we're not separating nothing. Like this. And so it was just this thing. So I think there is a learning that needs to happen. And I do think that's why public education is important. That can come through music, art. Art is one of the main ways that like people get it. Like I remember seeing some art and being like, oh shoot, I need to learn more about this. Like seeing some Romare Beard and stuff. I was like, oh, I need to learn more about that. And so like that's what was coding out like
Romare Beard and
exactly. Like, and that's what was like, that's why it was coding out like us, because you could say whatever you want about the song, but it does include this verse that actually could help some people learn a little bit of history. And I think that is the kind of sometimes education that people need, because you're right, Rosa. Sometimes the young people are not, because of the algorithm. You said it right. Because of the algorithm, it literally doesn't allow certain things to filter through unless you look for them. So,
also, when you're mentioning right the Nazis and that, I think it was very purposeful that Trump's people had that type of rally at Madison Square Garden, right? Like, obviously, y'all watched it. A lot of people to this day
didn't watch it.
Not understand that the Nazis literally had a rally at Madison Square Garden, but also that the United States of America was working with the Nazi regime, right? So, for me, probably with you, Josue, también, we look at those things as historical markers. So we're like, yo, these dudes went up and were like, yo, let's have a rally. What happened? The Nazis, let's mimic that because they're crazy, you know, and then all the craziness that they said. And obviously, as a Boricua, I was tight, but I'm like, it's not just about that. It's about the fact that they know they're doing this. They're repeating it looking pretty. Like, this has happened before. And what are we doing to what can we do? Because I really, really believe this moment right now is most people are like, what are we going to do? Like, what? You know, and then how much time do we spend on it? And then, like, we're here. We know as organizing and activists, like, we have to spend time on it. But, you know, going back to my earlier point, it's like, how much time do we give them? Is there a moment where we just like, yo, basura, good, I'm going to do what I need to do? And I think that's where we're at as a people in this country. Like, I truly, truly believe that people should be doing stuff locally. It doesn't mean that we're not connected nationally. It just means at this moment, nothing we're doing nationally is working. So the only thing we should be doing is this kind of conversation, but also how we are seen as organizers, activists, and leaders in our community that can make all those connections.
Eroc, you were going to say something. All I want to add is there's actually a quick verse. I know this is, I wasn't going to bring up Minister Josue, but there is a verse in the Bible that actually is really tight for this moment that says, my people perish because of the lack of knowledge. Mm-hmm. And I think that moment that applies a lot. Like, how do our people perish as Black folk, as folks who are fighting for liberation? Because we think like we don't allow knowledge, we don't learn, right? So we don't learn, right? Like, you know this because y'all both know 5%ers. Like, you know, you always go, what's the mathematics? That was the question. Then you would learn, you get schooled at that moment. You have to figure that out. I was never part of the tradition. I was adjacent. And but our people perish because of lack of knowledge, because we're not learning, because we're not reading, because we're only reading certain things. And that's why public education is so important. Like, we could detach it from an institution and create our own, like this work that y'all both have been doing, the work that Marta did, the work that Miriam did, the work that all
the work you're doing too.
creating something out. Oh, so you don't want me there. Like what Shirley Chisholm said, you don't want me at the table? I'm gonna bring my own chair. I'm gonna bring my own table, and I'm gonna bring my own thing. Now, whether we want to work within the political structure or not, that's a whole different question. But we could do that. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say. That verse applies to this moment.
I want to, and I just wanted to actually.
I just want to say, fam, like I'm not wedded to a time, which is good. Like I don't do 45-minute things, so we're gonna be here for at least 15 minutes. But Mira, Eroc, before you say this, someone on YouTube said everyone has had rallies at Madison Square Garden, including the Green Party and Workers' World Party. The Democrats made a really stupid argument. Yes, I understand that, Gavin. Yes, but the Green Party and the Workers' World Party weren't talking about an annihilation of a people. And they went called Puerto Ricans trash, right? Like, not people have had rallies. The thing is that that particular party, that night full of genocide and hate, is now actually part of the ecosystem of this new administration in the White House.
Word. And I think that's important analysis. It's funny watching some of the people who were asking us to temper any critique before the election, ask us not to do it now either. It was like you don't get to say it during or after. I had someone say to me, "It's not the time for blame," and I'm like, "Ain't nobody trying to blame. We're trying to analyze what happened. You want to make this a sports analogy? We're checking out to see where we went wrong so we can do better next time." And we have to be able to analyze that. And it can't be the same people who are making those calls telling us where we went wrong, because they're gonna do everything but blame themselves. But yeah, absolutely, the Democrats fumbled that. They banked on they disrespected what was at one point their base. I think the base fell out from under them. There's so much analysis on that I could get into. What I was thinking about earlier to come in, and I will bring it back, is that I've actually had the opportunity to connect with mad youth, incredible youth who are thinking, who are reading, who are
engaged. Yeah, me too. Yeah.
So I just wanted to shout that out because yes, we're up against something, and they're doing a really good job at disconnecting, coming for Rosa. You've mentioned twice now that vote. There's a reason you've mentioned that twice, and I am super concerned about it. I'm concerned about it for my community, for our grassroots organizations, for any organization who stood up against genocide, any organization who is speaking up for human rights. I'm terrified about that. And when people say, "Oh, we shouldn't be scared," we could be alert. We could be very alert. And I think being afraid is okay. We just have to build the courage. Very few of our warriors were fearless. Some of them I think were. And there's something beautiful to that. And we'll honor them in our history as like fearless warriors. But most of us are working with the feeling of fear and the emotion of fear. It just becomes, where's the courage? Rosa, you've given me courage. There are things that you have said that have allowed me to feel not alone, so I can say what I say. And I think that's what it goes on. And it just be like, in what way will we build that coalition? Locally, we're getting defeated as well. And we need to keep fighting locally. I don't think we're being honest about where we're at. Like, I think people, because of this conjuring and this understanding of like, yeah, we will win. Yeah, we will, but we are losing in many ways. And that doesn't mean we can't be defiant in the face of defeat. But we have to be clear what defeat is. Defeat is that Sister Asada Shakur is in Cuba because she cannot come back here. Defeat is that Brother Mumia Abu-Jamal is still in prison. Defeat is that they are still escalating and putting our babies, our peoples who are struggling to find a better life in cages and threatening to mass deport, and that they're creating. So there is all these things that are very, very real. And the counter, anytime I get the opportunity to say it, it's not going to be neoliberalism. It's not going to save us. It's not going to get us through this. And I think that there are some of my peers in that world who forget that I was in the electoral politics world.
Right.
So they talk to me like, "Oh, you don't understand, blah, blah, blah." And
like, no, I understand.
Everything about me is tickled by that. I'd be like, I really do understand. We've seen this. This is Groundhog's Day. We've seen this. It's a ping pong situation. And the way we see it coming over and over again, and we see the same people whom are asking us to look past reality and shape a new reality where we vote for genocide are some of the same people who will now command a lot of the eyes and ears to talk about what's next. And this actually helps me transition into my next thing. I'm trying to work on my bitterness about that right now. I have a particular bitterness that I want to make sure. I don't want to be El Viejito or the aspiring elder who's just too bitter. I don't. But I do want, and rage is sacred. I got it right there. This rage is important and this anger is important, but I don't want to be bitter. And I want to figure out ways to be more tolerant of our folks who are trying to figure out how to navigate this path we're in. And I do think that one of the things that we're not being real, if we are to be realists, is that this is a time of suffering and sorrow. This is a time of grief, of genocide, of things that are coming our way. And those of us who are going to be able to sit with suffering and sorrow to help create the connections, to help people to care for each other, are going to be very necessary right now. That's the type of organizing that's going to be necessary, whether it's mutual aid, whether it's trying to figure this out, because the reality is that, I don't think we're being honest about what we're up against here.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's why when I read
I think the historians they know. But then there's somehow some of them, because there's something happening where I'm watching a little bit of disconnect to the fact that we are absolutely losing our values and our morals and our belief that in self-determination for people is being faith. Even words like faith have long been co-opted, and so we try to figure out, I think, in that place to try to be where do we go? Where is our places of sanctuary and care where we can ideate and imagine and be a part of the discussion? One thing Rosa and myself and you also has said this entire time, we keep referencing literary geniuses, people who wrote incredible books, and they exist as books right now. And so maybe it's time to buy a few of those and start giving them away to our peoples.
Well, look, when you have posted last week about your rage and you said people have called you in, and I was like, absolutely not. That's my problem right now. It's not just our rage is sacred, it's happening. Yep. I have a 20-year-old daughter
who is amazing, by
the way, who wants to potentially move to Georgia, where I'm going to have to tell her, I mean, she already knows, if something happens, if you have a reproductive issue, do not go to a hospital in Georgia. Call your mom and my dad, or call my sister in another state that come and get you. You know what I'm saying? So we should be outraged, right? I really, 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 truly believe when Roe versus Wade was overturned, if it was men's, let's say, dystopic, men who come out of prison can't have babies, the whole country would have burned down in days. So now we have our children, and those that are children in our lives, literally having to have a conversation with those that are women and identify, if you get pregnant, leave the state right now, I got you. You know what? Once Roe versus Wade was overturned, I bought hundreds of pills. Right? Right. So for me, we should be raging, and we should. I am not down with people it's going to be all right. No, it's not, because the reality is, in the past, they would have lied about what they were doing, but now they're not even lying about it. They're telling us straight up. So I am not with that. Don't be upset. Do not rage. The thing that we know as people in the movement, you don't let it stop you. But one thing I do know, and my daughter's been very clear, she said to me, I feel like a lot of you keep lying to us about the real conditions, about reproductive rights and the climate. And so I said, what should we do? And she's like, Mommy, you need to be telling everybody they should be as angry as they are, but then there's a way to channel that anger. And I know personally, I do that and we do that, but I am outraged that my daughter and all these young women in this country do not have their reproductive rights. I am pissed. I'm angry. And what we do is we have the conversations, but I'm also a big believer. I'm at the point now at 52 where I'm like, I don't got time to switch you. Like, you want to believe that? My family, we got big families. I got family that voted for this dude. And my drawing line is like, yeah, I'm going to see you at my funeral. I might not even let you in. But I don't have time to be going to the people that believe this and being like, hey, let's have a conversation. Let's have dinner. No, because they don't care about that.
I'm with that.
I am going to stay pissed off. And that's why when I saw your post, I was like, bro, I got you. Like, I think nothing you said, and I get it. Like, people want to be like not our elders, but people want to be like, don't be that angry. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? Tell that to Harriet Tubman. Tell that to Alicia Campos. Tell that to Colombian Black people that are being killed from not taking their land. Like, we should be outraged. And even though we are, it doesn't mean we're not smart and can't make these things happen. So Josue, like, I wonder what your take. I'm not sure if you have children from your body, but I'm sure you have young people in your life. I really believe that these young people are saying to us, keep telling the truth, do not lie to us, but then help us figure out what we do with that energy.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm glad the justice. I was going to mention reproductive justice as one of the main things that we need to focus on, because it is Black and Indigenous women, whether Latina or not, that are the most affected by these abortion bans and by all of these things. And the framework of reproductive justice, if we as a world, as a country, would start to understand that framework that came from Black women, right, as the framework in which we need to talk about reproductive rights or healthcare, right? Because reproductive justice is about making sure that women who give birth can live their full lives, can make all the decisions they want to make about their families, whether we want to support women who want to have abortions or women who want to raise children. Like, that justice is about justice, right? It's not just about one side. And I think that we have allowed that the polarization of certain topics to frame us into like a little corner, like it's only this, but actually reproductive justice is so fruitful and really encompasses like the whole lived experience. I do think that I'm with you. I'm glad that you mentioned that, Eroc, real quick, about that there are young people doing great work. Some of the folks that are helping us at the forum right now are young people who are doing great work. They're getting their law degrees. They're out there doing art. They're out there doing decolonizing their spaces. They're decolonizing religious spaces because they know like those are the spaces, all of those spaces are what we need to do. And I think the lie that has been sold is the lie that, we will be all right, but only if we direct the rage in the right direction. Like, it's not just like, oh, let's just sit back, everything will eventually be fine and we're going to be chill. Look, that's not how that's going to work. Like, it's only going to work if we recognize where Black pain and suffering comes from and how we need to change that pain and how do we direct our rage. So I haven't read your post, so I want to read it, but I think it's about directing our intentions to the right place, because if we don't direct them to the right place, then sure, we could get angry or whatever, and then you curse at whoever, okay. But that needs to be very directed, and it needs to be like very specific. And so like the right, let's call it the right, that has done all these targeted things. We're gonna get people over here. We want to get people here. We need to be very targeted in how we fight for liberation.
They're crushing that. They're crushing it in the church, in their churches. They're organized in that way. They have been. We know the Tea Party and the Christian right and Christian hegemony and the Christian supremacy is actually what's behind this guy. And the tide that they were able to be compassionate, quote unquote, compassionate conservatives with George W. And now they can be MAGA. And there's this way in which we have to be really honest about what that religion has taught them is okay. And where, I think you're right. For me, it was just like, where are we aiming it? That's all. I don't want to.
You gotta aim it.
Trying to swing the hammer on my peoples. I do think sometimes the critique is crucial, and I don't care if it's. In fact, Rosa, thank you again. I learned that from folks like you and Kazi as well. Like, we're gonna say it, and it might be, and from Audre Lorde, it may be bruised, it may be misunderstood, but I'm gonna say, hey, it feels like you're capitulating to the neocons and the neoliberals by not being critical of this Cheney-fied version of the Dems and asking us to vote without any questions. And I'm not saying there's not strategy behind that, but please don't call it revolutionary. That's not realistic.
Yeah, and I think like
that's what I was getting at, but I did get some of my elders did get at me, and some of them, by the way, were like, "Fuck yeah, get them," and others were like, "You know, I think that you should consider that as a," and I loved those people, so I listened to them. And there's some other folks. I think mostly what I hit a nerve on was that a lot of people who reached out to me are also feeling bitter. We feeling bitter. We feeling a rage. We're feeling this frustration. And for me, I just think the bitterness, the cynicism is the poison. I think skepticism is a crucial aspect of learning and revolutionary. I think the cynicism can eat us from the inside. And then
I agree with that because we do the work. We're not cynicists, right? Like, because that's just,
exactly.
Look, and I also I'm always like, well, what is your vantage point? Like, let's say there's someone critiquing you that's making $500,000 a year. What's your vantage point? Your vantage point isn't with the working class people. That's a lot of the anger towards the Democrats, quote, is because they're elitism. But when you look at all Trump's picks, they all went to Harvard and Yale too, right? Like, if you look, like, don't be saying because we went to college, it's elitism when you're everyone on your crew, including Elise Stefanik, who, thank God, I'm 2 miles out of her district in Albany. Like, she's talking about elitism. Dude, you went to Yale. You got a law degree out of Harvard. Like, you know, I don't know what it is about them that kind of brings them all together, but I also think it's very, very dangerous that people are not understanding what is about to happen. And I'm like, do you think it's a movie? Do you think it's not happening? Do you think you're going to be immune to it? No, absolutely not, because now they hold all the branches of government.
And of course,
haven't seen in over 90 years. So I haven't been alive 90 years. What I do know is they got everything, including federal judges. So that whole, and lastly, I don't have any, I'm not having a conversation with my enemies.
Fact. That's not what
members voted for him. And I'm like, thank you. I'm not going to that family reunion because you know what? My time on this earth is limited. And I have no one point of me that ever wants to sit with you. And that's where the Democrats mess up. Now, that being said, the third parties have also made mistakes. Where I'm at right now, super, super politically, is I think the electoral political project is dead. I think these next 4 years where they try to curtail future elections is real. And I've spoken to many people that disagree with me. Maybe my time in running is showing me at this moment, and young people are showing us they're done with a two-party system, but they might not necessarily want a third party within the system. What they're talking about is, what does liberation look like?
And Josue, I think Josue needs to roll.
I do need to roll real quick. For everyone who's watching, I'm going to therapy right now, so I gotta go to I want to keep that session.
No, I know. I keep everybody on so long.
But mental health is really important, y'all, and I think that just make sure that you keep up on that. The last thing I'll say, and thank you, Eroc, I just want to say that I'm down with this. I that's why I frame everything around Black liberation. Like, the Black radical tradition is really, like, I remember early on Miriam telling me, like, we need to follow. That's what we need to follow. Because everything else, not everything else, I'm not talking about other liberation movements, but that really does care about freeing and really upending this world, right? That's what the nation of Haiti, right, which then became the Empire of Haiti, with Jean-Jacques Dessalines. That's what it did. Like, when he named it a Black Republic, right? That's where Public Enemy has their album called Fear, or their song Fear of a Black Planet, right? It's connected to this idea that there's this fear, because that does overturn the whole thing. And that's my last thing. I just want to say, like, I think that we need to fight for that, for liberation in all the spaces that we mean. Free Palestine, free Mumia, free them all. And so that's what I'll say right now.
As we say, So first and foremost, thank you, because we've been on an hour and a half, which means we'll have to keep doing this. My purpose for this show, fam, is really about, again, the Black radical tradition, because, you know, identity is one thing, you know, the politic is something else. So this show is not about bringing Afro, Black, Latinx identified folks. It's about like, we'll uplift that, pero también, you know, we are going to talk about other things. So Josue, thank you for your time. I know he has to get off. Family, check out Afro-Latino Forum. Josue is the executive director. And Eroc, before you go, I just want you to share your information and some final thoughts about what we're about to do next.
Whew. Thank you. I think we definitely need to show some patience and love with those bias. Oh, speaking to something you just said, I think generative conflict is for the folks who are on our side.
Yeah.
I think diplomacy is for the enemy. I think, and we can figure out whether we're going to be diplomatic and cease embargoes, ceasefires, etc. There's diplomacy that needs to happen, but I don't have time, generative conflict time for my enemies. That's not y'all on the other side. You oppose human rights for people, you go over there. And then generative conflict is for my comrade in the struggle. Maybe I fucked up, or you fucked up, or we fucked up, and we want to figure out how we could work together still, or get out of each other's way. Because there's 8 billion of us on Earth. It's going to go by like that. We are dust in the wind soon. And so what I think of when I think of like actual, genuine, palpable hope, not the 2008 hope and change thing, but palpable hope, is that one of my elders had told me, like, you know, consider that we're building this, shrine to liberation, and it's going to take 600-700 years to finish it. And we might be on our 300, 400, 500th year. I'm going to put my brick on there. I'm going to put my brick on the shrine. I'm going to make sure I may not see this thing finish. We may not see the end of the shrine, but they're going to look back in the legacy of our liberation and our struggles, which I think they do a really good job of separating us from that. So we then begin to feel isolated, or we think it's a me game versus what we look like. And all our ancestors and our elders that died, and because they loved you, Rosa, and because they loved me, and they didn't even know us, and they hadn't even met us, but they loved us so much that they would give of themselves. So I feel like whenever I get really depressed, which I deal with, or feel despair, which I do, sometimes I'll go up like a hawk and I'll look down and I'll say, oh, we are a continuation of those who fought in conditions that annihilated people, that attempted to destroy and erase people, attempted to genocide people. And so if we are of a legacy and a liberation of people who will fight, I'm gonna just take my brick and do what I can with it. And I think that gives me hope. You had talked about, like, you had asked us to think about a book we're reading now, or that we were gonna get into.
Yes. Oh man, Josue had to go, but yes, bring your book. I got mine.
Yo, fam, I am going to commit, because I'm a Paulo Freire guy. Pedagogy of the Oppressed is a big deal for me as a popular educator. I found this book in the thrift shop. I didn't know it existed.
Me too. I found it in a library that was giving books out.
So I never read Pedagogy of Hope, and I need it. I need some hope. I need some pedagogy of hope.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to commit to getting into this one right here next.
Yeah.
And I've been doing a lot of reading with my babies. So I've been reading a lot of the young adult stuff. So like,
so mine is a new one. It's called Solidarity Across the Americas, the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party and Anti-Imperialism from Margaret Power. It's amazing, because what I'm always saying to Boricuas is, like, our history does not begin in 1898 when we were colonized.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? And I think as a historian in general, the one thing you're taught, and if you're in history programs, is that you have to wait 50 years to study something. Me coming out of Black studies, I'm studying today, and what we call that is public history, right? And I think we have to engage in that more around, like, what does public history look like? It's culture, it's arts, it's museums, it's, you know, art fair, it's all of that, you know. And I just really want to encourage people to take the time to sometimes read. Like, people meditate. My meditations, I just lock myself in a room. But Eroc, I really, really thank you. You know, I'm going to have you back. Everybody, like, the only way I could keep this going is just support it. If you want to volunteer, I love that. I got a Cash App if you want to send me things so we can get a social media person. But I think at the moment that we're in, when I look particularly of the early 1900s, when you're looking particularly at, like, Black people in the United States, they weren't able to do anything. They couldn't vote. They couldn't own land. They couldn't. But look who they are. And who they are is why we are here. If you look up Puerto Rico, unfortunately, most people think of Puerto Rican as being the island as a deficit. Something's always happening to us. I want to change the conversation is how are we doing things to stop them from doing that? And I think if the reality was really and the real history of Puerto Rico was told, it will be one day, is that we're people of revolutionaries. They try to kill us. We're not going anywhere. We're not going to allow you to colonize our land. We are giving love to the people in our lives who have made purposeful choices to go back to Puerto Rico.
Yep.
And I do think that there's a moment that comes in everybody's life in the United States where you're like, am I going to stay here for another 30 years? Am I going to go there? The whole thing of that is you can stay or go, but if you're doing this work, that's what we need more of. And believe me, believe Eroc and me as organizers, there could be a 5-minute conversation with a young person that turns them around, because that's what happened to me. And you talk about when you started reading, you're like, okay, I found my people.
Yep.
Yeah.
100. Or even just something you might say. Like, I think let's remember that our stories are our stories, and our ability to share stories and hear people's stories. Let's connect. Let's ask people how they have survived through it before. Talk to our elders. I know a lot of young people will be like, oh, how you got elders? And I'll be like, fam, I will shovel when it's no. I will ask them, do they need anything from the grocery store? I'm doing my part to try to connect with them. Or they got surgery, I'm gonna come. It's the anniversary of the death of a loved one, I might come through and make them some food. I think it's like our job to, and I was like that younger, and as I get older, I think of it as our job, and they pay you with so much more than that. And so I do think folks need to make sure we find that intergenerational connection. And I think that's part of what I'm gonna be doing locally here as well. I was doing that collaboration with one of my elders who passed away. And I want to continue that. So another thing is going to be like thinking about how we put people in the room that are multi-generational, that are going to be like, ask me how I know. And I think that's really important. Ask me how I know.
Yeah. So, homie, love you, Eroc Arroyo-Montano. We have Arroyos in both our family. I really appreciate you staying longer. Thank you. I mean, the amount of people that are watching right now is amazing. I will be back Wednesday with Disrupt the Chaos. And even though Thursday next week is Thanksgiving, I'm going to celebrate it by bringing y'all a dope guest. I will announce in a couple of days. Because I don't celebrate Thanksgiving. No. But what I'm going to do on that day is, hey, Matt, people are at home, and I'm going to do a show. And love to you, your family. I guess I'm going to have to come to Boston for a couple of days and hang with you.
Thank you, and vice versa. I'm gonna have to figure.
And give out your Instagram and stuff so people can follow you.
I'm about to hop off socials. I'm about to hop off socials for a little bit, but
that's fine
for the rest of the year. But I'm at Eroc Soul Bear, and then and I'll be back in 2025.
So. Yeah, I mean, everybody take a break. It's not bad to take a break. You just need. Sometimes we want people to take a break to refortify because we don't know 2025. I
want to do some more reading. I want to get all the reading I'll be doing on the internet. And on the internet, like I'll be spending an hour on there. I could read for an hour, so I want to do more reading and some more writing, and maybe some more phone calls to my elders and my people. Instead of seeing what's up with the reels, I might call someone and see what's
call somebody voice to voice. Yeah. Well, thank you for your time. I mean, I kept you a half hour longer, but I really enjoyed this conversation. We'll be back. I'm gonna talk to you again, and everybody just keep sharing. Take it, splice it, whatever, and keep sharing it. We're gonna continue to have these conversations because right now it is our time, particularly as us as a people that are revolutionary, to have these spaces so we could really analyze, but also show everybody that the struggle is beautiful. We can laugh, we can be happy, and we can do all the work as well. So that's about todo. Appreciate you, bro.
Igual. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Just follow. Peace.